President Vladimir Zelensky is in Washington, D.C. today. He's going to be speaking with President Trump. He's going to be trying to push back on what President Putin said in his conversation with Trump last night. What we saw is kind of a typical situation that has evolved over the past months, where President Trump has spoken with President Putin and then started to speak a little differently about how he sees the war in Ukraine. So before the call with President Putin, President Trump was talking potentially about thinking about providing Tomahawk cruise missiles to Ukraine, which is something that Ukraine really would like in order to be able to strike deep into Russia. After the call, President Trump seemed to be speaking a little bit more skeptically about the idea of providing these missiles. And he also said that he's going to be meeting with President Putin in Hungary in the near future. So it seems that quite often when Trump begins to speak about putting more punitive measures against Russia, Putin gets on the phone with Trump, and then Trump starts to see things in a different way. President Zelensky was hoping to come to DC and push on what has always been the Ukrainian plan from the beginning since Trump took office. The only way you can get peace is to make the Russians stop. He wants more weapons. And at the same time, he's going to be pushing for the kind of economic measures against Russia that would damage Russia's economy. That's very much been his approach from the start. But now what we're seeing after this phone call with Putin, that Trump appears to be back onto his efforts to make peace through negotiations, talking with Putin, meeting with Putin again. It'll be interesting to see how this then plays out in this new context. Zelensky has been treading a very fine line with Trump since the beginning. He had a disastrous meeting with him at the beginning of the year where he pushed back against Trump.
You don't have the cards right now.
Zelensky has somewhat changed his approach to Trump in recent meetings. He always starts by talking about his gratitude to President Trump for his efforts to make peace and for the weapons that the US has been providing. And he's been trying to make clear that he also has a vision for peace. That approach, new approach by Zelensky, appeared to be yielding some results, as we've seen Trump's rhetoric change in recent weeks. But after this call with President Putin, we seem to be back to a President Trump that we saw maybe a few weeks earlier, where he was more talking about having talks with Putin. So Putin seems to have achieved his goal, which is to put off any sanctions against Russia, to put off any provision of significant new weapons to Ukraine. And so that's what Zelensky is going to be up against, is turning the dial back again in his direction. President Trump is certainly feeling the momentum from his peacemaking efforts elsewhere. Zelensky himself has tied the attempts to bend this conflict to Trump's efforts in the Middle East. He compared President Putin to Hamas and terrorists and said that the language of strength and justice will work against Russia as well. So he's trying to tie the two attempts to get peace deals together. Whether that is how things look also in President Trump's head is far from certain. I think with the Trump-Zelensky meeting, what we're looking for is what is the kind of mood we see between the leaders? Do we see Trump, who is again coming back to seeing things as he appeared to have done in recent weeks, to seeing things more in line with how the Ukrainians do, that the Russians can indeed be defeated? Or does he still see things more in the way that President Putin does, which this is a time for talks, we need to stop the fighting, and negotiating with President Putin is the way to achieve that? I think that tone when we come out will give us an indication of where Trump is heading in terms of making decisions regarding the Ukrainian war. But the key thing here that Ukraine is waiting for is not only the tone, but it is, will any change in tone lead to significant decisions? Trump has moved closer to the Ukrainian view of the war, which is that Russia must be stopped and that the way to do it is providing more powerful weapons and putting economic sanctions on Russia that would cause significant damage. But he hasn't taken any action yet. And so that, in the long term, is what Ukraine will be looking for.